First of all, I would just like to put out a disclaimer here that I'm looking at this subject and I'm looking at this community from a completely outsider perspective as an artist. The British, they sort of, created this, I would call it confusion of identity, confusion in our cultures, in our values.
I also feel that maybe we could have been a more kinder community. Do you agree?
For sure, for sure. Like right now, we've got so much intolerance, we've got so much hate.
So, do you feel that the mindset related to Khwaja Siras has changed over the years from the society?
I feel like things might have changed just a tiny bit, but there's still such a long way to go.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to a brand new episode on the Aadmi podcast. This is Perniya back again with a brand new episode and a very new guest. Big new guest. And our guest here today is none other than Ariza Abbas. She is an interdisciplinary artist from Lahore, and I can't wait to know more about her. And I would like to know about her research papers that she has written, and that is pretty amazing. And the rest, I leave it up to her for introducing herself. So, hi, Ariza, how are you?
Hi, Perniya. Thank you so much for inviting me. This is a great pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for the opportunity to actually, allow me to share my work here and to talk about the things that matter to me. So I'll just do a little bit of an introduction.
Yes.
I am Ariza. I'm based in Lahore, and I'm currently completing my bachelor's. And I like to call myself an interdisciplinary artist because I feel like my work doesn't really, stick to particularly one subject or one medium. And so, there's a lot of like little bits from everything that I do. So yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned that you are an interdisciplinary artist, right? So, what exactly is interdisciplinary art? Because this is something very new to me as well, and I would also like the viewers to know.
Right. So when we talk about interdisciplinarity, what we mean is taking two or more disciplines or fields, or I would say pools of knowledge, and then, using that existing knowledge to create a new field or knowledge. So, for example, if, a lot of the things that we do in today's world are interdisciplinary, whether that's different fields that we work in, or whether it's, for example, if you're making an advertisement, then you've got camera, but then you've got sound, and all of it comes together to create this one product that takes inspiration and takes knowledge from all these different fields. So that is how I would like to call my practice. And then even within, if we're talking about interdisciplinary art, then you've got visual arts, you've got communication design. It'll take all of this knowledge from these different fields and then bring it together as one, and I think that's pretty exciting.
It is. I strongly agree with that. But the next thing I wanted to ask is that since you're an artist and a lot of times you connect your emotions with art, and I would like to know that what were the struggles
Right.
that you went through, and how did you channelize those emotions in the form of art when you are an artist?
So I feel like a lot of my own art comes from and takes inspiration from my identity and the community around me, the space around me. These are just some of the subjects and topics that I'm interested in, that I would call are my like inquiries that I look at creatively. So I feel like a lot of the times my work revolves around subjects like grief, whether that is personal grief, individual grief, or whether that's, grief as a whole that we might feel as a society, besides that, being part of my identity. So that is something that really, not only impacts how I look at the my world and my work, but also, it plays into the work that I do. So just recently I did this project where, I was looking at visual culture, specifically within the Shia sect, within the practices of Muharram, the first month of the Islamic calendar. And it is a time for grief and mourning. And so, I looked at it from a feminist lens. So then again, that is where the interdisciplinary part comes from, because you're taking feminism or gender studies, you're bringing it into, spirituality, you're bringing it into visual culture. And so I think that is, just like one of the recent projects that I did. And that is basically what my work is about.
Wonderful. That's amazing. I am super proud, super happy for you. And you mentioned that you wrote some papers, like there were two major research papers, right?
Right.
So, what were those papers about? Like, can you explain more?
These two papers were what I wrote as part of my bachelor's program. The first paper that I wrote about was on the Khwaja Sira community, which is the indigenous local term for the trans community in Pakistan. And so I was looking at how, Khwaja Sira community plays a role in sort of forming this queer subculture within Pakistan. Because, and for viewers who may not know, the Khwaja Sira community is indigenous to South Asia. So when we use the word trans, that we sort of, borrow it from like Western language. But the Khwaja Sira is the term that the communities that are present here, they use to identify themselves. And they've been here for like around 3,500 years, And interestingly enough, one of the things that I came across in my research was that they were actually pushed to the sides, or they were marginalized after colonialism. So when the British came, that is actually when, they really started to struggle as a community. And we see that impact still present today. So that was like the first paper that I wrote. And then another paper that I did very recently was on like space and the idea of home. But then also because I was looking at the space around me, which I live in Lahore. So obviously, Lahore has a very deep colonial history. So I was looking at it from the lens of, colonization and how that plays an impact into the space that we view today. Because, again, with space, our space sort of defines how we interact with each other, how we interact with our environment. So,
Mhm.
when we have these buildings that are a product of colonization, I was sort of interested to know that how does that impact our interactions. So that is another paper that I did.
You mentioned about Khwaja Siras that are, which is the transgender community, right? Since you have some details about it, so I wanted to ask that what kind of difference in attitudes and behaviors of the society have you observed towards the Khwaja Siras, especially in our country?
So I think first of all, I would just like to put out a disclaimer here that I, I'm looking at this subject and I'm looking at this community from a completely outsider perspective as an artist. So what I'm doing is I'm making observations. I'm not trying to intervene. I'm not trying to define it for them.
Yeah,
And obviously,
it's just a perspective. Another.
it's just a perspective that I had as an artist or researcher. So like I mentioned about, colonization and how the Britishers, the British, they sort of, created this, I would call it confusion of identity, confusion in our cultures, in our values, in a way. And that is, really when this community started to become, marginalized. Just a couple of years back, we made some really great progress in terms of laws and policies that would safeguard the community's rights. But then again, they really had to work for it. The community itself is what, worked towards creating that space, harvesting that space, coming into this, like starting a political dialogue, asking for their own rights. And I feel like as a society on the whole, we could have been, and we should be even now. If you've been watching the news, you know that there is a lot of transphobic hate that's been going around. There's a lot of
Yeah,
misunderstandings,
I've seen that.
miscommunications. And so, even right now as a society, we can do so much more that we're maybe just not willing to do, maybe because it's really out of our comfort zone. But then also something that I would like to point out is I feel like language plays a very major role in all of it, right? Because when we say the word trans, we're talking it immediately hits our mind that okay, maybe this is a Western idea, this is a Western agenda, while that is not the case at all, because they've been existing for the last 3,500 years at least, from the knowledge and data that I gathered. So maybe if we had a larger vocabulary to use in language, maybe that would help people understand that better. Even now, this conversation that we're having, just two South Asian girls talking in English, conversing in English. So there is that point of inaccessibility, which sort of makes it hard for people to really grasp that those concepts and to understand one another.
I also feel that maybe we could have been a more kinder community. Do you agree?
For sure, for sure. Like right now, we've got so much intolerance, we've got so much hate. And like I said, that, that confusion of identity that was
Yeah.
created because of, colonization. We've sort of, even, if we look into history, we see that there were many different movements. There were movements that said, no, we should side with, this part, or there were other movements that said, no, we need to, really embrace our own culture. And I feel like throughout the years, South Asia and like specifically like Pakistan and India in general, we've sort of really lost that essence of who we are. Like we're really confused in where we stand, who we want to follow, what we want to do. And again, that those are the things that play into how we treat others or marginalized groups within the society.
So do you feel that the mindset related to Khwaja Siras has changed over the years from the society?
I feel like to some extent it has, but there haven't been any major changes, I would say. And again, a lot of it is because of the Khwaja Sira community, because they've chosen to speak up, they've chosen to take up these political spaces, they've done so much activism for their own rights. And even though we should be the ones who should be standing side by side with them, but again, because of like these are little, I feel like these are really complex topics to be covered in such a short amount of time. But then I feel like things might have changed just a tiny bit, but there's still such a long way to go, and there's so much more that we can do.
Okay, I feel that as well. I agree. You've been a part of the Aurat March, right? I saw in your
Right.
profile. I saw in your
Yeah.
Insta. So,
Yes.
a lot of people don't know about what Aurat March, what exactly that is. Why don't you tell our viewers who are watching this what Aurat March is?
Okay, so Aurat March was started in 2018, and it's a women's march. Basically, Aurat translates to women's, and it's a march that's held every year for the rights of women and gender minorities within Pakistan. And over time, I feel like that as a movement in itself has become very, or at least it has tried to become very inclusive of other gender minorities and other marginalized groups. And again, it's interesting to see that the Khwaja Sara community played a very, very major role in helping women to achieve these rights, to spread out that word, to the community stood side by side with women. And now it's very important for us to sort of, not exactly, I would say, repay that favor, but again, stand with them now that they need us. Very recently there was a Sindh Murat march for trans rights that was held in Karachi. And so that was like a very like a big milestone when we talk about like gender equality, when we talk about trans rights. And so last year I basically designed, coming back to Aurat March, I basically
Yeah.
designed their
How
poster
was the
for
experience?
2022. The experience, I feel like it was good. So I was, following a lot of directions. Like we were celebrating 5 years of Aurat March. and we were talking about, economic justice. We were talking about, equal rights when it comes to employment, equal rights when it comes to wages, and also looking at domestic work that women do in households as a form of labor. Because a lot of times what happens is that people, especially in South Asia, they don't really consider household work as labor. They expect women to just do it, and they expect it to be very, very easy. So that is something that Aurat March Karachi was really, really focusing upon. And so I designed the main poster that went out.
That's so cool.
I do
We're
have the
going to show
files.
it right here. After all of that Aurat March experience and seeing all of the communities stand together and stand up for each other, so what is your definition of feminism as a woman?
I feel like feminism is, again, it's a very complex term. For me, it has to do a lot with intersectionality. Because if anyone has read even a little bit about like the history of it, it started off as being in support of a certain class or a certain race of women, and then over time and over years, it sort of expanded into this greater, larger movement. So I would say that feminism is, it's a movement for not just women's rights, but also other gender minorities. When this movement is trying to take up space, we're trying to maybe take away rights from other groups, but that's not the case. What As feminists, what we're trying to do is to create equal space for women, for gender minorities, because in my opinion, there is enough space for all of us, but it's just that when there's this imbalance of power, that is when one group suffers. As feminists, what we're trying to do is to sort of bring that balance back, and I feel like, I hope I've described it well and I've defined it well.
So, having witnessed the Aurat March is the right means of feminism.
I feel like this is a sensitive subject to talk about, but then I would
In
also
simplest
say that
perspective, like a lighter perspective.
there are like a lot of improvements that can be made. One of the main conclusions that I made in my paper when I was writing and researching on the Khwaja community was that language is a very huge barrier that we as South Asians face, where like our official language is English, our national language is Urdu, but even then we've got so many, local languages. So I feel like, again, the problem with such movements is that people have this misconception that they're a westernized idea. But I feel like a lot of that comes with the lack of language. So maybe if, not just talking about the Aurat March specifically, but if such movements that, are already very sensitive in nature due to the patriarchal sort of structures of society, maybe if they were a little more inclusive when it comes to, talking about the people that you're educating, using languages that would help them understand your perspective better. Because for example, if someone were to see this exchange of dialogues, they might not understand these subjects as well as if we were to do it in, let's say, Punjabi or Sindhi, or whatever local language that they feel. So I feel like that is one drawback of generally, such movements in Pakistan.
You talked about colonization. So,
Mhm.
what significant changes do you think colonization has brought in Pakistan, like our country?
I feel like, because currently my my creative inquiry is into language. So again, just the language that we're speaking, it's the colonizer's language. The clothes that, maybe the sweater that I'm wearing, that's a colonized piece of fabric. And similarly, the paper that I did was based around like space and architecture. Like, for example, Lahore, Kent in itself is like, it was built as this colonized space. And so colonization has, brought that confusion in identity that I talked about earlier as well. You see these people chasing certain standards of beauty. We see, these certain ideas being introduced into society that may or may not be beneficial for us. But we,
So there,
we
there are,
continue to.
sorry to cut you. So there are certain beauty standards.
I mean, yes, I would say so. This obsession with being fair, being light skinned, having like this really tiny nose, which, like these following these Eurocentric ideas of beauty. Even if you listen to like old, it just reminds me of this old Bollywood music, this song which talks about, how this girl has blonde hair and blue eyes. And in reality, the actress had neither of them, but it's this idea of blonde hair and blue eyes. It's These are very western, very ideas that we've taken from colonization. The systems of education that we follow in schools, that is very, it comes from colonization. We see, like I see myself struggling with speaking Urdu. I can only understand Punjabi. I can't speak it. And these are, my own languages. So where does that come from? Even, when we're discussing all of these ideas, in whether it's in, an academic space or otherwise, we're using a language that doesn't really belong to us. So, what it makes me wonder, and it should make you wonder as well, what does that say about us as a society?
As a researcher, as an artist, you've seen a lot and observed a lot. And how would you conclude your journey, this entire process?
I would say I haven't seen quite enough. There are still so many
Still more.
ideas that I want to explore. These pools of knowledge, as I said earlier, that I want to, dive deep into. But because, there are certain limitations, as a human, I can't really touch upon everything. Up till now, my experience has been great. Art has been this really driving force in my life. It's sort of a lot of my personal identity, and a lot of my personal moments in life have given me this certain framework, this certain viewpoint or perspective to look at things. And then art and research in itself, especially this interdisciplinarity, has allowed me to explore these things in a really free manner. And so it's like very liberating.
Do you plan on seeing more things, like on more topic, talking about more topics, or researching on more topics? Have you planned, or
I feel like currently, because I did this paper on colonization and like colonized space very recently. So currently, that is where my interests are lying right now. So I would say that the next step would be to dig deeper into, this subject, how colonization plays into that space around us. And then, as South Asians, as a Pakistani, as an artist, how can I decolonize it? Because decolonization, a lot of people think that what it means is to reverse the effects of colonization, but in such a globalized world, that isn't really possible. We've got some, we had some pre-existing ideas, we were colonized, we different ideas were introduced to us. So now, with all of these mixed ideas and these mixed identities, how do we move forward? How do we step into this next phase of like this really highly globalized world and become better citizens? So I think that is where my creative inquiries are taking me right now.
great. So that brings us to the end of the episode. Thank you so much, Ariza. There's so much more power to you. I'm super proud of you for whatever you're doing, and I hope you succeed in whatever you plan on doing. I wish you all the best for the future. And everyone, you can check out Ariza's work on Instagram. Thank you so much, Ariza, for being here, for taking out the time. And I hope that we can meet again for another session.
And just one last thing that I'd like to say is that, again, I did mention this in the start, but thank you for inviting me to this platform. A lot of the times, people feel super uncomfortable discussing such subjects because they're so sensitive. But the fact that you invited me here and allowed me to express my opinions and express my thoughts and ideas, that means a lot to me.
Yeah, Aadmi podcast is all about voicing your story, your it's just a perspective. It's through a researcher, and I'm super happy and amazed to see that I've learned so much from you. So I would like to thank you again for taking out the time for being here. And everyone, please like, share, and subscribe. Please do comment how did you like the episode. and I will see you in the next episode. So please subscribe to the Aam Aadmi podcast channel and take care, everyone. Bye bye.